Anytime I'm deciding whether I'm going to do a review of a piece of hardware on this channel, I'm looking for one of two things. Number one, is it new? Is it innovative? Does it do something that I haven't personally seen or tested before? Or number two, is it a tool that I would consider having in my shop? Well, when I was approached by EcubMaker to do a review of their toy DIY 4-in-1 3D printer, CNC engraver, laser etcher, I decided that this fit both of those. And so this was something that I decided to bring you here today. Now, what I'm going to be covering in this part of this video, I'm going to obviously cover the overall specs of this machine. We're going to look at the size, we're going to look at the capability, but what my main focus is going to be is on the 3D printing ability of this machine. Number one, because I think the 3D printing to get that right is a little bit more difficult, and obviously that's been the focus of this channel up until now. Now in part two of this video, I'm going to be covering the laser and the CNC capabilities of this machine, and then give you my final impressions of the machine as a whole. So if this is something that you think, like me, will fit into your shop, if you are new to 3D printing or laser or CNC and you want to test out a machine like this, stay tuned. I'm going to cover all the details. I'm going to show you all of my test prints, and we're together going to see, is this a machine that's worth your money? And that's what I'm doing right here today on Kersey Fabrications. Let's go. So let's get right into the review with the specs of this printer. Now I'm presenting these in no particular order. I pulled these directly off the website or out of the manual. Obviously I've verified that they're more or less accurate, and that's what I'm presenting here. So first of all, the build volume of this printer. We have a 180 millimeter cube build volume. What that means is the depth is 180 millimeters, the width is 180 millimeters, and the height is 180 millimeters. And that's going to give you something that's about as tall as this Deadpool that I have on here now, maybe just a little bit bigger. And if you were to lay this guy down, that's about your width, and that's about your depth. Really nice thing about this printer is it is an all metal and injection molded design, and the all metal really comes in nice when you're talking about the rigidity of the frame and the rigidity of the build. So all the way from the base plate, which is a big metal sheet, then we have this large upright mounted directly to that metal plate, and then we have all of the movement being carried with linear rails. We have a linear rail going up this pillar that they've got for their upright. We have a linear rail moving in the X direction, and we have a linear rail moving the bed. So all of this is extremely rigid. We don't have much flex at all in the system. Obviously, I can move it if I really try, but that's not forces you're going to typically see on the printer in normal operation. So it also has a thick magnetic bed on here that I really like. This is a removable magnetic sheet. It comes with a sticker on here for your actual build plate, and this is replaceable. In fact, they even come with an extra one in case you damage the one it comes with. Like I said, I really like this. It's very thick. It's easy to bend when you want to get parts off, and since it's magnet directly to metal plate, there's no wrong way to stick it on here. It doesn't have to be aligned in any particular way, so I just use my fingers to line it up. This is a 4-in-1, as they call it. Now, where they get 4 from, single extrusion counts as one, dual extrusion counts as another, and then they have the laser etcher, and they have the CNC machining tool head. Now these other tool heads, they're easy to remove, they're easy to reattach. They have these simple screws that just attach them. We'll be covering more of that in the second part of this review. Earlier versions of this printer did come with 2 different tool heads, one for single extrusion, one for dual extrusion. I think they eventually realized that that was unnecessary and that you could do both with one tool head. So now there are only 3 tool heads that come with this printer. I agreed with their decision. I think that there's no reason to have 2 different tool heads that have to switch out if you're still just 3D printing. So the retail price for this printer is $599. At time of filming, you could get it for $549 on Amazon here in the US. GearBest had it for $599, but to get it to the US, you're going to pay quite a bit for shipping. The maximum temperature you're going to be able to get on this hot end is 260 degrees. That's kind of impressive, but I think it's the way that they've got it built. Now, it's marketed only for PLA, so that 260 degrees is way hotter than you're ever going to actually be able to print or want to print with PLA. So again, I think you're going to max out probably, what, 225, 235 at the absolute max if you're going with a PLA-only printer, but that's what the spec is. And it's important to know that this is PLA only, and in fact, I'm only going to be evaluating it for PLA because, again, it's what it's designed for. There's no other filaments that they're actually marketing this for. And it has to do with the way that this is designed. The cooling on this has a single fan. When this fan is on, you're getting part cooling and you're getting cooling of your hot end. And so if you were to doing something like PETG, that's not going to work very well because you don't usually cool PETG, if not very much. And so that would actually hamper that sort of filament in its printing process. So if you're getting this, expect no PETG. I also did try to do TPU because technically you can use cooling and it's very similar to printing in PLA, but I did end up with some jams and stuff, so I can confirm you're not going to use TPU, or at least particularly soft TPU on this printer. Now, in their specs, they mentioned that this is a Windows-only printer. They have their own proprietary software for this, primarily based on Cura, and they haven't done the modifications to anything except for the Windows client. So keep that in mind if you are a Mac user or even a Linux user. You're going to have to find your own slicing software and configure that for yourself if you're going to try to use this printer. If you're worried about how much space this is going to take up, obviously I think you can tell here from the table, it's still a very small printer. This is even smaller than something like an Ender 3 or an Ender 5. It's going to take up a lot less space. The exterior dimensions of this in metric is 372 millimeters by 315 millimeters by 395 millimeters. Really small machine, small footprint. It is kind of heavy, keep in mind, because again, this is all metal. It is really a beefy machine. And again, big metal plate on the back, big metal column holding everything up. Really is well engineered in terms of just its overall construction. So let's go and talk about the unboxing a little bit. I did a complete unboxing video for this. I may show you some clips of it here or as I go through this part of the review. I may even throw up some at the end of this video or in another upload. But the unboxing of this was very simple for me. It comes all pre-assembled and you pretty much just have to add on your hot end. I'll cover all that just a little bit more in a minute. But unboxing was very good. You'll see it comes with a lot of components in the box. It comes with what you need. It comes with both the tool heads. It comes with the safety goggles for the lasers. It comes with a bag of CNC parts that we're going to cover. And then as far as like your printing parts, since that's what this part of the review is covering, it comes with screwdrivers. It comes with spare parts. It even comes with a replacement optical sensor for your x-axis. If you'll notice, and I'll show you this up close, it has an optical sensor for your x-axis. And if there's any problems with that, they've even included a replacement. If you have any problems with your couplers, you got replacement couplers in here. It obviously comes with your usual SD card, with your test prints, instructional videos, a color version of your manual. It comes with a nice USB dongle that you can use to read all of your media. It really has a nice set of parts, even some replacement parts for the hot end. One thing I don't see in here is any replacement nozzles, but since it uses your standard MK8 nozzle, I believe is what it looks like under here. Anyway, those are going to be standard nozzles you can buy from anywhere. If I'm wrong on that nozzle, I'll pop it up here on the screen, or you can check that out later. But as you can see, nice bag of parts. It comes with a CNC carving raft so that you don't cut into your print bed. That's super nice. It comes with, like I showed you a minute ago, it has the extra bed sheet for your bed in case you damage that, in case a print doesn't come off the way it's supposed to. It also comes with sample material for your CNC engraver and for your laser etcher. It even comes with a couple of nice pieces of cardboard to etch into. And one thing I thought it was nice to see was a glue stick, a large glue stick, in case you have any problems adhering to the bed. Put a little bit of this down, and it sticks really well. I had a little problems adhering on one of the prints that I tried, but with a little bit of this, I had no problems. It cleans up really well too on the sheet that they've provided. The only component I can really complain about in this whole thing, first of all, love their filament. They include what they call PLA Pro. It printed beautifully, and you don't usually get that out of a printer. Some nice sample filament, so I recommend the filament they included. And the only thing I can complain about is this spool holder, and I really don't get this spool holder. It doesn't really work well. I mean, even with their spools, you would have to have 2 of their spools. It doesn't really want to move well by itself. So, you know, print your own spool holder. There are a lot of designs out there, and hopefully you can find some that'll print on this bed without any problem, because I used this the whole time for my test printing because I did want to use what they provided. It works. Unfortunately, it just doesn't spin very well, and there are better options out there. We'll take a minute here to talk about the manual that the printer comes with. And I want to talk about the manual kind of in 2 parts. One, we have the printed manual. So the printed manual it comes with, first, right on the cover, it has a default Z offset that you're going to want to use for your personal printer. This is something apparently they tested in the factory, figured it out for you. So it has in the instructions how you're going to want to enter that. Now, I found that for the printing portion, since I hadn't switched to any of the other tool heads yet, that Z offset was already in there. For mine, it's negative 1.4 millimeters, and it works just as they promised it would. As I was going through the manual, I found that their step-by-step tutorials, while not the clearest, I could follow them without any problems. They have information about EcubWare, and I found the manual fairly useful. Now again, on the SD card that it comes with, you're going to find instructional videos. Those are much more useful because they walk you through it. They show you it all in video format. A lot of people learn that way, so that's a little bit easier to follow. They also have a YouTube channel where you can find those videos and similar videos to the one that it comes with. And also, if you need a soft copy of this manual, you'll find one of those on the SD card as well. So here's the construction section of the review. Again, I've already talked a lot about this, but I'll go ahead and mention it here in case you jump to this section. Again, the construction of this printer, extremely well built. It is metal on metal on metal. It's very rigid. You gotta like the linear rails. This is kind of a higher end feature. I do think that the price of the printer is sort of premium, but I do think you're getting some higher quality parts than with a lot of the kit printers that you may purchase. So I think you're getting your money's worth, at least in terms of the construction. Again, you have a lot of nice molded parts, nice power button. Now these are on the back, they are plastic extruders. Now these are well built. These are a lot better than what I found on the Creality, for example. Just the overall design, they're tighter. So even though they're injection molded plastic instead of metal, they're really tight design. They don't have a lot of wiggle in them. So I really didn't have any problems with it. The only thing weird I found about the entire construction was that the heated bed is actually just a piece of aluminum. It's not actually an embedded PCB heater. They have a heat resistive tape on the bottom that attaches the traces to the bottom of the bed. I don't think it's a real problem at all. The only reason I noticed it was because I took some of this stuff apart and I found that if you pull a little bit on this cable on the back, you can kind of peel away that sticker and you have to re-adhere it. I wish that they would have gone with a embedded PCB on that bed, but this does work. I had no problem with bed heating. I had no problem with the unadhering of that sticker until I actually took the thing apart. So I'm not too concerned about it, but it is something to note. Another thing about this printer that kind of set it apart from a lot of the other printers that I've tested, this one has a built-in light. I thought that was a great feature. I've installed lights on one of my other printers so that I can come in the middle of the night and check on it. Just because if you're in a part of an office or in part of your house that's not well lit, this little light at the top is really handy. It's just a nice extra feature that they included, and again, still built really well. It's not just an add-on afterthought, but this entire piece of plastic, it holds your Bowden tubes, and it's your light. Really great addition. So now looking at the assembly process of the printer, as I mentioned, when you get this in the box, everything comes out in one big piece. All of the moving parts are already pre-assembled. In fact, the only thing you have to add is whichever tool head you're going to start with. Obviously, in my case, I went ahead here with the 3D printing tool head, but I could have started with either of the other tool heads that I wanted. Those are found separated in separate packaging in the printer. I've heard of some people having problems getting these Bowden tubes seated all the way in. I really never had that problem. I made sure that both of them were down all the way when I first started. And I've got blue here on the left, red on the right. They match the ones on the back, and I was ready to get going printing. Next up, let's talk about the electronics in this printer. So I took it upon myself. I really wanted to know what was in this thing. So I did disassemble the top part of this printer, which they actually do have instructions for in case you need to switch out your main board for any reason. But I pulled it apart. I took a look at the main board. I'm going to be showing you that here. Now this is an 8-bit main board. It is based on the ATmega 2560 8-bit chip, which is a really nice 8-bit chip. It has a 4988 driver, so this isn't a silent printer. Now, due to its size and probably the lower voltage they're able to run at due to the smoothness of the way that this printer runs, I had very little noise, particularly for 4988 drivers, but it's not completely silent. The only thing I really had to complain about as far as the electronics were concerned was the LCD is very utilitarian, not in terms of the way a Marlin LCD usually is, but this one only has the bare minimum that you need. It has temperature adjust settings, it has change out the head settings, and it's got some just minor fine tuning on it. It's a very small LCD. While we're on the electronics, let's talk about the firmware. So I also plugged in my computer to this printer, and I did find that it is running a flavor of Marlin. I could not tell what that flavor was. I did go ahead and flash the latest version of the firmware that I found on their website for this review. It was newer than what it had shipped to me. So for this entire review, you'll find that the firmware is what they've labeled 1.2.5, and it goes with their EcubMaker 147 beta, which is labeled 2019-1205. That's what I used for this whole review. Again, it's based on a version of Marlin. I did ask if the source was available. I was told not yet, but they're working on it. Soon available on their website is what I was told. Obviously, I have no control over that, but I did want to pass that on because maybe it's tweakable. Maybe there are some settings you could add to it yourself if you're into that sort of thing. But as of today, the source is not available, but hopefully we'll see it in the future. As far as the upgrading of the firmware was concerned, it's not the easiest process, but then again, I really haven't seen a printer with a very easy firmware upgrade process. The only thing I can say is they provided all the tools, they provided all the instructions, I followed them on my Windows machine, and there wasn't any problems upgrading the firmware. I had no missed flashes, I didn't kill the printer at any time, so overall, not an easy process, but a doable process if you're careful. Now let's go back to the power supply and safety of this printer. Now, as I mentioned, this is an external power supply. I like that for a lot of reasons, particularly from a safety standpoint. If you're only running 12 volt DC to this printer, you really have a fairly safe machine. You can't end up with mains on this printer. And the power supply it comes with is a 24 volt output, 5 amp power supply. It's a great power supply, at least from all of my testing. Doesn't heat up. It is an auto switching power supply, so it's going to actually support multiple countries out of the box. It is a 100 volt to 240 volt auto switching power supply. And again, as I mentioned, it's easy to replace in case there are any problems. I was unable to verify that there's thermal protection built into this firmware, but I was able to confirm it with the manufacturer of this printer. They told me that the thermal overrun protection was built in, even though I could not verify it myself due to the nature of the way that this printer is built. I do think that the chances of you running into a thermal overrun situation due to the way that the software works, due to the way that the printer is built, is fairly slim, but it is nice to know that they have enabled that in the software. Now, I've talked so much about the printer itself, what it comes with and everything. Let's talk about actually printing with this printer and what my experiences were. First of all, I mentioned auto leveling earlier in this video. recap on that, again, at the very beginning of a print, you're going to find that the auto leveling takes about 10 minutes, including the heat up time of the printer. I found that it worked very well though, every time in fact, and if I had any adhesion problems, it wasn't because of leveling. And again, with the included glue stick, I was able to get rid of any problems that I had with any like sharp corners or with anything that I just wanted to adhere better to the bed. When you first get everything set up, as I mentioned, I went ahead and did my firmware flashing because I do think when working with a tool like this from a manufacturer, it's best to go ahead and get the latest software on here. So I went ahead and upgraded the firmware to 1.2.5, and then I went ahead and downloaded the EcubMaker 417 off their website that goes with that version of firmware. Found that the installation process on Windows for EcubMaker was very easy. I had no problems installing it. And then when I brought it up, I found that it was very easy to get running on it because, again, it is a Cura derivative. I did check with the software. It's derived from Cura 3.2.1. So my only complaint on the EcubMaker in that sense is that it is an old version of Cura. I wish that they would go to the 4X version so that it would have some of the newer features. Going through the slicing process, I found that most of their settings were very well done. I particularly liked the raft settings. Their rafts are terrific, as I'm going to show you on these prints. I got terrific rafts on all of them. They peeled off very good, and not only there, but that bottom layer of the print above the raft always looked really, really nice. The only things I didn't like with the default settings were the supports. I found that their support settings by default were fairly useless, and I ended up having to go there and change the support settings myself. And then the only kind of Achilles heel to the entire process was how slow that EcubMaker slicing was. And I even went in, compared it to a newer version of Cura. New version of Cura would slice a benchy in maybe 5 seconds, where their version of EcubMaker, their version of Cura, would take almost 30 seconds to slice the same model. I found myself on large models, particularly large models where I had to compute supports. I found myself hitting the slice button, walking away, making me a drink, come back, only to find that it's almost done. So I don't really know what it was, but their EcubMaker slicer, extremely slow, painfully slow. You're really going to kind of have to adjust your workflow to use it properly, because you're not going to want to do like I usually do, which is change a setting and slice, change a setting and slice. You're going to want to, for the most part, get those settings right the first time, then press slice, and then when it's ready, you'll be able to export that to your SD card without any problems. But that was my experience with their software. Overall, the software, very easy to use, very much Cura, but for some reason, just really slow. Moving on to the test prints themselves, let's look at the parts that I actually produce. Now, first of all, anytime I get a new printer, I always go to, is there already a slice part? Is there already some G-code on the SD card? And in this case, there was. And the reason I do that is because I feel like if they've sliced it, this should be the example model for them. This should be what I should be able to get out of my printer if I slice things correctly. And so the first thing that you get off of this printer, if you go with their embedded G-code, again, it is a raft-based print, which I found for this printer, rafts work really well. I got this beautiful vase off of here. I find that there's no ringing on this vase. I find that there are, it's just a very clean extrusion. I used the filament that it came with for this. Again, the bottom of this print, very, very clean coming off of that raft. It popped right off without any problems. So this was a good one. I do feel like since it is a vase mode, it was a little cheating, but it does show how clean of an extrusion you can get out of this machine. So I really didn't mind it too much. It's a heart, it's a vase. Again, nice filament, great extrusion, good first print. So when I start my test prints, I usually go for the mechanical sort of prints first, the things that tell me about how the printer's printing. So the first thing I went for was the XYZ calibration cube. I wanted to know how accurate the printer was. In the X direction, I found that we are down to like 20.08. So within a tenth with like under a tenth with my inexpensive calipers. On the y-axis, I have 20.11, so a little less accurate on the y-axis. It's getting within 2/10 or so. I'm not really counting the thousandths because of the accuracy of these calipers. And in the z direction, right spot on at 20. So the z direction is spot on. By the way, since it is running Marlin, if you hook up the USB to it, you can actually set those settings manually. So if you wanted to do some post calibration on this printer, you could use an XYZ cube or something like that to actually fix your calibration. So from there, I go on to the Maker's Muse tolerance test. Now this is a terrific test if you want to know how tight will my printer print, how tight can I get the tolerances, particularly if I'm printing mechanical parts. So on this, it starts out at a 0.5, 0.4, 0.3, 0.2, and a 0.15 millimeter tolerance, and you can then move these dials to see how the tolerance is on this printer. And I easily able to move 0.5, 0.4, 0.3, 0.2 moves and is extremely smooth. 0.15 is stuck. So 0.2, very, very good. If you can get 0.2 out of a printer without any tweaking, I think that is a great setting. That means that on either side of this tolerance test, you're getting a 0.1 millimeter gap, and that's extremely tight, and I was impressed out of the box with no tweaking. So for my next print, I went with the staple in the 3D printing industry, and I printed a Benchy. Now, you may notice this is the first print that I did that I was using another brand of filament. I believe this is a Ziltech gray filament on this one, where this is the Pro PLA that the printer came with. On this Benchy, I found overall the hull looks very, very good. There's no problems with overhangs or anything on the hull in terms of, you know, any sagging or anything due to lack of cooling. I wouldn't say that the extrusion is perfect on it, but again, I just switched filament. That could have something to do with the filament, particularly up into the cabin area. Just the extrusion doesn't look as good as it could. Just a faint amount of stringing on it as well. So I will have to say this is actually my least favorite of all the prints I did. It is the only one I printed in the gray filament, so I'm going to give it just a little bit of leeway because, again, maybe it would have looked a lot nicer in the black. I didn't go back to reprint the Benchy in the black. From there, printed this small Captain America model bust because I really wanted to do something that was more artistic, something that had some layers to look at, something that had some hard edges as well as some soft curves. I printed it at about a 45-degree angle so that I could take a look at the front of Captain America, since that's what's going to be facing outward. Looking at this print, again, this is yet again, I was testing other filaments on here. I wanted to know, do other filaments perform just as well on this? This is a filament 1 blue filament. And I have to say, this one printed really well. The extrusions in some places are really, really good, like on the face. It's really, really clean. Somewhat on the body, I'm going to have to take a look and see at the original model if it has some of this texture, because I do actually believe it does have texture, because it goes from having texture on the parts of the suit, but then as you go out to the belts, as you go somewhat on the star, and like I said, on the face and hair, it gets smooth again. If you look on the base of this print, you can see the American flag. Even the tiny, tiny stars show up in this model. You can read Captain America. And on the back where there were supports, they came off fairly well. Didn't come off great, so I think, again, I mentioned earlier the support settings definitely could use some tweaking, but they did come off. I'm not going to be staring at the back of this model. The part that was up, the part that doesn't have any marring because of the supports, looks really, really good. So since I was having such good luck with the single extrusion on this printer, I thought this was a great time to test out the dual extrusion. Can it do as well with dual extrusion models as it did with the single extrusion? So first thing I do, of course, go to their SD card that it came with and see if there's any pre-sliced G-code. There was pre-sliced G-code for a dual extrusion model. So I had the black put in as the primary extrusion color. I had a sample spool of red that I put in on the secondary extrusion color, and I went to town not knowing what I was actually going to be printing. And I got one of these very traditional 2-color sample prints of a traffic cone. Again, it printed a raft, which the raft, very, very clean, came off the bottom. The bottom of this print looks very, very good. And this is spot on. I see just a touch of bulging, kind of, where it switched between the filaments, but it's very, very minor. And the overall print, it's a strong print. The adhering between the 2 colors were very well done, and the very, very good test print. Was really happy with that one. One thing I was able to also see from this first dual color test print was that they don't need a filament transition tower where you're wasting a bunch of filament building up as you transition the filament. What you'll see on this printer is that they've already got a filament transition system built into it. They've got this tray here, and along with this tray they have these 2 little rubber pieces that actually wipe the filament. So when it's ready to transition, you don't have to do a transition tower in your slicer. You can let the printer do it itself. It's built into the slicer, it's built into the printer. And what you'll see is when it comes over here to switch colors, it will extrude, it will do the transition between your filaments. You'll end up with the waste coming out the side of the printer. And then when it starts going again, it has already done the transition in color. Now you don't have to waste a tower there. You'll end up with just a big mess of filament on the side, but that waste of filament is much less than what I see on most of the transition towers, because now you don't have to waste filament except for when you're doing transitions, except for when you're switching colors, which is much better than what you have to do with the transition tower, which is print a layer of tower whether you're transitioning or not. I really, really like this system, because one of my biggest complaints with dual color prints is the amount of filament you're wasting, and with this printer they've already taken care of that for you. So from there, I didn't really want to mess around. I wanted to see how far I could push this dual extrusion, and the hardest sample print for dual extrusion I've ever downloaded is this 2-color tree frog. And the reason this is so difficult is that from the very first layer to the very top layer of this print, it has to change filament. And not only is it layering it maybe in a geometric way, but it is having to layer each filament in between in winding kind of ways to the other filament. And so it's very, very easy to knock pieces of that filament off, to not really get back where it's supposed to be. And as you see here, it printed on a raft just like I did before. I sliced this one myself, keep in mind. So I brought this into Cura, I assembled the pieces. I have all of this footage. I'll include some of it here if you're interested in all of my slicing, if you're interested in how I did all this. I recorded it all. Let me know in the comments, hey Chris, we want to see how you did all of this, and I'll include it. But I digress. This printed a raft, because that's what I asked it to do, so that it would have a solid foundation for these small feet. And from there, it printed the first time on this tree frog. And as you can see, of course, you're going to get close-up views here. This thing is gorgeous. It is the only time that I've ever successfully printed this tree frog. Printed it from the very first layer to the top. The only thing I can comment on in terms of quality is that there's some overhang droopiness under his chin, but that is a very extreme angle on his chin, and I didn't do any sort of supports on here, so you'll see some of that overhang droopiness. But the overall quality of this tree frog, very, very well done. There is no color mixing on any of the layers, and you don't see any gapping between greens and red. It was able to go right to the spots it was supposed to. Again, it did all of its color transition using this built-in system, and it printed gorgeous. And from here, I didn't actually print any additional multicolor prints, because, I mean, it really doesn't get any harder than this one. And obviously it can print something as simple as this. I was very impressed. The only other multicolor print that I attempted to do, multicolor, was I tried to do some PVA support material. So that's dissolvable supports, where you go PLA in one extruder, PVA, which is the dissolvable solution, in the other extruder, and I didn't have any luck there. I'm not going to blame the printer at all for that, because I just couldn't get the PVA to stick to the PLA, and so that's not really the printer's fault. Maybe there are some settings that I could tweak to do that. It doesn't come with any like special profiles to print PVA and PLA together. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to get some really cool dissolvable support prints. I'm going to spend a little bit more time with that on this printer in particular, because I do think it prints so well, but I was unable to get it to work for this review. The last print I wanted to test on this was to sort of take up the full build volume of the printer to see how it does if I wanted to print something large, or is at least as large as this printer will do. So I went back to a model that I know very well because I've used it in multiple videos on this channel. I went back to my Deadpool model, and I think you'll be able to see this Deadpool model is really, really gorgeous. I could not say that it's flawless, meaning that if I look over it, I can see some of the, I can see some extrusion lines. I can see where there are just micro differences in some of the layers. But given the price point of this printer, given what all it can do, I am thoroughly impressed with the quality of this print. There's no supports on here. This was printed without a raft. This was printed directly on the bed. Looking at the bed, I think I used glue stick just to make sure it stayed down for the whole print, because this is a pretty long print on here. But there was no stringing. I used no supports on the overhangs of these arms, and they're not perfect, but they're very, very well done, given that these angles are probably 60-degree angles or something from vertical, and I'm really impressed with the overall quality of this print. This is really a display piece still for this printer, because it did such a good job with the default settings. Like I said, no stringing at all. This is, again, a filament 1 filament. This is their traffic red filament. I've used it plenty of times before. I've never printed a Deadpool this large before. But like I said, I wanted to go just about full size on here, and as you can see, it did a really good job of taking up that full height of that print bed, and I was very impressed with the overall quality. So I think the only thing I wanted to add to the printing portion of this review, in terms of did I run into any problems, did I have any issues, the only real issue I had with the printer that I couldn't seem to get around was when I went to unload the filament. I ended up with kind of a glob on the end of my filament, and so when I went to unload it and I tried to pull it out, I couldn't actually pull out the filament each time because of that, like I said, the little hardened glob of filament on the end. In order to unload my filament each time, I ended up having to pull out my Bowden tube, and then I was able to pull out the filament after I snipped it off. Definitely something that you shouldn't have to do. I haven't had any problems like that on my other printers. It's more of an annoyance than anything, because it's really easy to fix. You, like I said, pull out your Bowden tube, snip, pull out your filament, and you're ready to load your next one. I don't know if this is something they can fix in firmware anyway, or if it's just an issue with the way that the hot end is designed, but that was really the only printing issue that I can recall the whole time I was printing. So I think it's time to summarize my results and give you sort of my final feelings, at least on the 3D printer portion of this machine. As I think covered fairly well here, I was overall really, really impressed with this machine. The test prints came out pretty much exactly like I would expect a solid printer to come out. The dual extrusion worked great for me. The test prints off the SD card worked well for me. My own models worked well for me. Again, the only thing I really didn't care for were some issues with the slicer that I had. Again, it was slow. The support settings in it were a little bit off, or like I said earlier, they kind of just were worthless. But they were easy to fix. I mean, if you're familiar at all with 3D printing software, it's pretty easy to fix the support settings. You can change the raft settings, you can change the brim settings. Like I said, it's Cura, so all of this is configurable. It just may be an annoyance if you're a new first-time printer and you haven't done anything with supports before. Again, the print quality was very good. I was super impressed that I could print something as complicated as this tree frog on this printer without any issues. So overall, with the 3D printing portion of this machine, I was very happy. I think one thing I would like to do as kind of a power user would be to install my own version of Cura, to import as many of their settings as I could find in terms of like the machine settings, the start and stop G code. Go ahead and put that in. Maybe switch to a new version of Cura, because then I'll fix that slicing issues. Hopefully I can replicate their filament switching with the default Cura. That's something I haven't tried yet. But that's all things that I would like to move forward with 3D printing on this machine. As of having this in my shop, this is the kind of machine I would really like to have around when I just have a small part that I really just need to spit out. I need to slice it, I need to put it in the machine, and I like to come back later and see it printed. So particularly if it's a print that maybe doesn't need supports, if it's something like this that is a mechanical print or that is a model that I can leave the machine, let it do its thing, and come back later. I think this is really good for that. For the first time printer owner, I do think that this is a great machine. I think that its overall design, keeping it small, keeping it relatively quiet, this would go well in an office, in a corner. It looks nice, it's well built, its external power supply is one of the safer designs for a 3D printer. And I think since you're using a version of Cura, I think that's really going to give you a good start into 3D printing, because then you can start tweaking it, you can start uncovering some of those settings, and if you want the printer to do something that it didn't do because of settings, you can learn how that works. As a power user, I am glad they have a USB port. I am glad that it is running Marlin, because that allows me to tweak some of those settings so that I can get even better results out of a machine that printed really well for me. So as usual, guys, I hope that this was more information than you wanted to know about this printer. This was all my experiences with this printer, and all I can do is be honest with you with what I found. I do have the CNC and the laser portion of this review coming very soon. I hope you guys will come back for that one, and you know me, I'll be as thorough on that part of the review as I was this one. This machine was provided by EcubMaker free of charge, but no other money has exchanged hands for this review. Now, if this was enough to get you thinking about purchasing this machine, head down to the description. I've got two links for you. One, if you're in the US, I have the Amazon US link. At the time of publication, that was $5.49 through Amazon US. Obviously, if you're a Prime member, that's free shipping. If you're in other parts of the world, I have the GearBest link. I noticed that they had warehouses at time of publication in Germany and in China, and so there's going to be hopefully a close by warehouse for you to pick up this printer. Follow those links, it will take you straight there so you can pick up one of these machines. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and give it a like while we're sitting here. And if you're new to this channel and you liked what you saw, hit the subscribe button, because this is the kind of thing I do here. I go out of my way to include as much information in reviews and in mods and in 3D prints as I can fit in a video, and I hope you really enjoy this kind of content. If you want to go to the next level and support me, I have the tip jar through PayPal in the description, or you can become a long-term supporter through Patreon. I got perks over there. I like to publish special videos for just my Patreons, as well as release models there that are Patreon exclusives, as well as just early access to things. So if that's the sort of thing you're interested in, please head over to my Patreon. Again, like, subscribe. Thanks for watching this channel. This has been Kersey Fabrications. Thanks for watching.